Tony, we're coming together to talk about the state of inclusive growth. Just tell us first, why is rising inequality a problem? Why should we care about this?
Well, it's destabilising a huge amount of the things that we've come to find familiar in our economies, societies and politics. I do see rising equality as a symptom of a problem rather than, as it were, the main primary problem.
So it's telling us that some things are not well?
It's telling us, I think, that our political economies are failing, have failed.
Yeah.
And attempts to revive them, reheat them, generate temporary and partial successes, sometimes enough to get political parties through electoral cycles, but they are not solving the problems.
And you're a political economist, so you can see how rising levels of inequality have political consequences?
Well, unquestionably, because everyone is searching around at the moment for explanations in the UK of Brexit and in the US of Trump. And we may be searching around for explanations of the results of the forthcoming Dutch elections and French elections and who knows, German elections. So it's out there on the streets amongst voters. And you'll see it as a politician, I see it as a political analyst. And although we've got some good clues, I think, as to what has motivated a Leave vote in the UK and a Trump sort of win in the United States, we're a long way off fully understanding that. But I think there's every reason to think that there's that it flows out of a social disorder, which in turn flows out of an economic disorder, and at the other end of the cycle creates a political disorder. So it's telling us something very important. We probably should have seen it quicker
some time ago
than we did.
Yeah.
Although academically people have seen it, but I don't think anyone can really claim to have understood to have foreseen in public the political explosion of 2016.
Yeah. And from where you look at it, what are some of the causes of this rising inequality that we've seen?
Well, I think,
especially since the crash, I think.
Yeah, well, it goes back before that, of course, really, because we're talking about here the end game of a political process that began in the 1970s with the ending of what we, in Europe at least, have always called the post-war consensus, or in the United States you could call the New Deal consensus. That was unravelling in the 1970s. There was a decade or 15 years of political uncertainty and disorder, and then a kind of a new consensus was laid down under Thatcherism, and to some degree accepted, I think, in good part anyway, by New Labour. And that was, it's often presented ideologically as the triumph of a theory of the market, with associated quick references to Friedman and Hayek and others. And of course there is an ethic that underpins it, but I think there's something else going on there as well, which is growing business corporate control of the political process. You see it very starkly in the United States through the way the political parties have been funded, and the kind of campaigns that are now used to fund the campaigns that lead to the overthrow of Supreme Court decisions and the like. And we've in effect, I think, allowed a small elite of the rich or the corporately powerful, you can frame it conceptually in different ways, to grab the political process. And politicians then, or governing politicians at least, become the people who have to somehow find some way to respond both to those powerful financial forces bearing on them and publics who are still voting. And you can find those kind of third ways, to use a slightly pejorative phrase these days. You can find those third ways for a while, but they don't necessarily really deliver in the long term. And that's what I think fundamentally has led to the explosion of 2016.
Well, we've had a lot of analysis now, and there is this new agenda of inclusive growth beginning to take shape. At some point we've got to start making the translation into policy answers. Have you seen policy answers begin to emerge? Are there some areas of public policy which are obvious?
I think there's actually loads of alternative and good public policies out there in all sorts of areas, to do with the labour market, to do with corporate governance, to do with institutional reform. There's loads of policy out there on the centre-left, again for want of a better shorthand. What I think we lack is a theory of of change in a way. We lack a framework to pull these policies together. We lack certainly a story with which we can explain these policies in simplistic, and I don't mean to use that word in a patronising way, but in straightforward terms to voters. So you see, I think you see centre-left parties weighed down with specific policies, but no story to tell that resonates.
And it's not just about a different kind of state, it's also about a different kind of marketplace.
It's a different kind of marketplace, it's a different kind of society as well, picking up on all the new discussion of the role of social media and so on in the way in which people's politics are mediated. It's a different society, it's a different kind of marketplace, and here we have to remember marketplaces are always socially constructed, as we say in the academic world. That is to say, they're not given by some God-given law, they're created by actions, and they're usually created by actions of the powerful, not the weak. So we are in very new terrain, and I think in a way that the framing that most plausibly locates this for me is an argument about the model of capitalism that we're in, or that we need to get to. I think we can see a number of models of capitalism that have unfolded over the years, over the recent years. Initially a kind of very straightforward, freer market, neoliberalizing, Thatcherite, Reaganite economy. Then an economy, when that ran into trouble, beefed up by debt and borrowing, something that enabled really those without assets and without rising incomes, rising wages. And again, the UK and the United States are very similar in this. Certainly since the crash of 2008, the bulk of what once we would have called middle class British people and American people haven't seen a pay rise in real terms. So you get out of that by borrowing. And the liberal structures of corporate governance and banking governments allowed that to happen.
And you've written about one alternative story, which is civic capitalism.
Yeah, well, Colin Hay and I produced this little book, which we gave that title, and we're trying to be sort of cannily political in a way that didn't succeed really, because we wanted to abandon the debate about socialism and social democracy and not use those words really, but to accept that actually we're in a globalizing capitalist economy, but also to make the argument that there's not just one model that a national society or economy can seek to situate itself within. There are different models, and we wanted to argue that the Anglo-liberal debt-sustained economy, which had crashed in 2008, needed to be replaced by something different. And so we just engaged in a simple thought process really, a very crude way of framing it. We came up with 9 characteristic features of the Anglo-liberal model, and we kind of flipped them and said, what if each one of those was different? What would it add up to? But importantly, and I don't know how well it worked really, it certainly didn't catch any tide in Britain in 2014, 2015 for a whole range of reasons. But what we were determined to do, which I think is important, is to say that all these different changes that you might plausibly want to make vis-a-vis corporate governance or banking regulation or the labour marketplace or education and skills, and one could, there's a plethora of policy areas. They need to be stitched together. They can't just be...
They've got to add up to something.
Yeah, they've got to add up to something. It's not just like eating at a buffet. You've got to have a meal.
Yeah.